Wherever we look, our world is facing a huge range of unprecedented challenges. So if you're a leader right now, how do you navigate your way through this? How do you make decisions in the teeth of so much uncertainty? How are you going to reconnect your people and rebuild your team so that they're fit to face the future? And what does it even mean to be a leader in such an increasingly challenging world? These and other questions I've been putting to top business leaders from across Europe, and I've had some surprisingly candid responses. So why don't you join me, Nisha Pillay, for the latest episode brought to you by Sherpany of The Agenda. My guest today believes that seeking out dissent is a core attribute for leaders, especially when things don't go according to plan. Having the courage to listen when a team member brings bad news, for example, can make all the difference between success and failure. His name is Christian Casal, and for almost 3 decades, he ran McKinsey in Switzerland. He's now reinvented himself as a tech entrepreneur. He invests in the Swiss high-tech landscape. So let's meet Christian Casal. Hello, Christian. I want to start, Christian, by asking you about something you said to me when we last spoke, which was that you think dissent is really important. You feel passionately about that. But why? Why do you think it's so important?
Well, I think in management, it's absolutely essential, because one has to understand that the roles that people play define a leader as somebody who's managing a process, managing a group of people, but he can or she can never know all the details. So the people attending a meeting have actually a very important role, is to bring in their knowledge, expertise, analysis, etc. And if they have opposing opinions to the leader and have facts which the leader does not have, it's really important that they bring them up. Otherwise, the whole process falls apart and doesn't work. So I think dissent is not something which is like a skill or is something which could be valued. It's actually the reason why you are in a meeting. And I think that's so important. And there's tremendous amount of stories of big mistakes that can happen. And afterwards you do an analysis and you find out people did not speak up. So I think that's why dissent is so essential in management.
So give us one of those examples then, Christian.
I think one of the most famous and well-researched one was the invasion of the Bay of Pigs, which maybe our younger audience members would not know. But when John F. Kennedy ordered an invasion of Cuba just prior to the Cuban crisis, he asked his cabinet. And his cabinet said, yes. So he said, okay, everybody is in favor. It's a unanimous decision. So let's go on. And it was a total disaster. People died. It was one of the most embarrassing things that the U.S. had so far. And years later, analysts then went and talked with the people, and every single member of the cabinet said, I was against it, I was opposing, I didn't think it would work. But they did not speak up. And they did not speak up because there was sort of groupthink. They thought the president wanted it. It was actually not clear. As we all know, John F. Kennedy could not be interviewed. But the basic thing is the whole governance of this cabinet meeting fell apart because people did not speak up and wanted to please, or just wanted to be a good team member, and did not play the role that they should have played. Now, of course, we have to be realistic. There's a lot of noise in every organization. Every manager is confronted with hundreds of emails a day. A lot of people are speaking up, but some of the information is, of course, of low value. So it's not only dissent, it's also, trying to basically find the way through all this white noise and try to find out what exactly is important information. But my plea to all managers are, if you know something, you really have to speak up, otherwise you're not doing your job.
The reason people don't speak up is that they're worried about the reception that they're going to have. No one wants to be the bearer of bad news. Are you personally open to being challenged? How have you dealt with it when someone has come and said, sorry, that company we're advising, it doesn't stack up?
I think it depends on a few things. First of all, the person that is giving you feedback. I think if it's the first time you meet the person, you really have to listen to this person. I think over time you will listen much more to people who are consistent, who are very credible, who give you the important facts and don't confuse you with unimportant things. And on the other side, if people have a few times played their own agenda towards you, you will never listen to them when there's something going on where they really speak up, because they think, oh, this is again somebody driving his personal agenda, even though maybe in hindsight you should have listened to them. So I think it also has a lot to do to basically to work through these situations and be self-aware what kind of information is coming up. I think the essence of listening to feedback is also to step back and take a break. That's one technique I always suggest to people. If there's too much feedback on something which is negative, just take a day off for an afternoon or an hour or two, and then come back to the topic. And sometimes it changes.
You taken a break from a situation where you are getting negative information, you couldn't take it on board, but then over time you accepted that the situation was different.
Yeah, I had a few such situations. The one I'll never forget is when I had a very young team member who was constantly telling me that a bank we were consulting was actually in much worse shape than we thought the bank was, and that the analyst coverage indicated. And we were sort of under the impression this young person doesn't really know what he's talking about. I sort of tried to slow him down a few times, and then I said, okay, let's meet on a Saturday afternoon. We actually met, and I said, look, you have now 2 hours to try to convince me. And actually, he did his homework. It was absolutely important that I listened to him. And then we took that feedback and went into the right bodies to show what kind of situation this person found out. And this is somebody below 30, no big banking experience, but just did some more homework than the others did. So I had a few wake-up calls like that. And in hindsight, of course, you feel bad, but at the same time, you learned a very important lesson in life.
But what about yourself? Have you had to deliver unwelcome news as a senior leader, a senior advisor, for instance, to banks and financial services companies after the financial crisis, which they were not prepared to listen to?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the frustrations of the 2008 financial crisis, was that the privilege, of course, of a consultant is always we have a lot of time to look at the facts, and we can really go very deep, while the managers, they have 20 meetings a day. Second is, we come from another trajectory. We come from looking at the problem and analyzing it. And these managers, we have to understand that they have built up an organization, they have made a lot of profits, and when exactly the essence of making these profits is falling apart, it's very difficult to convince somebody that the essence of his profit of his career, or his actually essence of his work, is actually flawed. And there, I admit that openly, we were not always successful. A lot of them did not listen to us, and it took some banks maybe over a year until they really fully stood on the brakes to slow down investing in these areas that all fell apart.
So let's step back from this for a moment. How can we create institutions and leadership styles that promote truth telling, so that team members, however senior, feel safe to be able to speak their minds?
It's a very good question, and it's probably something you have to think really hard how to do that. I have some practical tips. I think, first of all, there are meetings where you have to rush through an agenda with 30, 40 points. That's just the essence of work. And I think you have to take away that time pressure or agenda terror of these 30 points. Otherwise, you can never have a good environment where you can speak up. I think the second practical tip is meetings cannot be too big. If you have 20, 30 people in a room, every leader is challenged just by keeping this herd of cats under control. And if you think that there you want to have an environment where everyone can speak up, it's just naive. It's straightforward naive. I actually don't think beyond 5, maybe 6, 7 people in a room will enable such an atmosphere. So it has to be less people. Third thing, I think you have to pick the right people. But then once you have that, so no time pressure, not too big a group of people, and an atmosphere where you have people that you can trust and work together, then I think you can do that.
We've been talking a lot about dissent and challenge. What about honesty? How important do you think honesty is as a core ingredient of leadership?
Yeah, honesty is sort of something which, of course, is almost impossible to say you're against honesty. You would almost be absurd. But I read something like, one psychologist says everybody lies 1.655 times a day. I don't know how we came up with that number. Another psychologist says up to 200 times you lie a day. There are white lies, there are blue lies. We all know about these things. I think the point is, I would not put these, so super high bars on a leader that are almost inhuman. Um, what I do think counts a lot is if you want to create a team of people that you work very well together, it has to be on an interpersonal level, it has to be really perfect. Because people, your direct reports will really listen what you do with them, what kind of feedback you give to them. Is this really honest? Is it just praise for just being nice, or is it honest praise or honest critique? And I think that's where I would really focus on. Second, I think the consistency element is sometimes underestimated. I think if of course you have to be honest to create a large group of followers, and you have to be a role model in your organization, but you also have to be consistent over time what you're doing.
Honesty and authenticity is another area which is much valued in the area of leadership. It's difficult, though, isn't it, to be genuinely authentic in this age of social media and cancel culture, in which we have to be so careful about how we express ourselves.
No, I fully agree, and I see there sort of clearly a step back of progress that was made in the last 20, 30 years, in the last 5 years. I mean, I have colleagues that are managers now that say if they ever have a speech in front of 100 people plus, they read down from scripts. They cannot speak freely anymore and tell their audience what they really think, because there could be somebody who's hypersensitive on one word, or this triggering some kind of emotional reaction, which so I respect that these people can have these reactions, but the flip side of the coin is now really that people are not authentic anymore, and they come across, of course, almost like a little bit like robots, which are talking down from a PR written script, and I think that's a big mistake. So there again, I go back to getting into smaller meetings where you can really talk with the people, really find out what their feelings are, what their emotions are, what they're really trying to push, what not, how they want to achieve certain goals. So I think that's very important. But and it's something which right now is difficult, and it's not just in business; it's also at the universities. It's even with politicians. So that's something we have to live with, and I hope there will be a pendulum swinging back again, where people can speak up again, and maybe occasionally do something which is not exactly perfectly formulated, but still tell the people what they're thinking.
I'd like to move on now to an area of your working life which we haven't touched on yet, and that is you as an investor. You've invested in what, a dozen or so companies now since you left McKinsey. What have you learned in the process? What are the criteria you use to invest in this company or that? Is it to do with
Yeah.
people? Is it to do with the business model? How do you decide?
Yeah, I learned a lot. First of all, investing is not something, a skill that you're just born with. You have to do your homework and do mistakes. But you also have to look at the people. And if I have meetings with leaders of startups or mid-sized companies, and I see they're not taking notes, I'm always surprised, because I know they have like 20 other meetings a day. If they don't make notes, how can they remember everything? And then I sort of say, this person is, if he has a meeting with me, he would like to get something out of it. Otherwise, he would not meet me. Then, why does he make notes? So that's sort of small things, and I'm sure this is not like super strategic, but it's sort of small markers of how somebody works.
So, looking back over the last 4 or 5 years, as you've been a tech investor, what do you think have been the mistakes that you have made, Christian?
I think one mistake is probably I didn't spend enough time to really understand the potential of the leadership of the investments, leader or leadership team. That's always difficult, and sometimes you're rushed into an investment. That's something which I should have, in some investments, spent more time. I think the other mistake was on exactly the value of the product or services. I did not spend enough time to understand what exactly the value of these products and services were for the customers of the company I was investing in. So that's maybe the two main mistakes. Maybe a third one could be what I think I'm improving now, but acting faster. So if things don't go well, or if the environment changes and everybody's innocent, it's just a change of environment. Pandemic is a good example. Move faster. Don't hang in 3 months if it's already clear where we are.
So I guess in a way, you're in a mentoring role for some of the leaders of the companies you're investing in. They're a younger generation to you in most cases. Do you think they need a different set of leadership tools than what you needed when you were their age?
So I would answer no and yes at the same time. first of all, leadership, and that's, I don't know, 60, 70% is basics. It's setting clear objectives, giving clear mandates to your direct reports, monitoring what they're doing, feedback, and then, corrective measures. It's setting out incentive systems which are consistent with what you want to achieve. Looking at to-do lists, and that's not super attractive sometimes, but it's super important to get the basics right. Now, second, yes, absolutely, there's a change in the environment, and leadership models have to adjust to that. We don't even have to talk about the technological environment or other things, but there's also change the mindsets of the people. You have to adjust to what the people want. Purposefulness is now a very important point. Environment is important, etc. And you have to, if you're a leader, you have to accept that and behave accordingly.
The challenge is greater, isn't it, for young leaders today, in a way, because they're not just having to satisfy on returns and profitability, but also these other softer expectations.
I agree that it is different. I'm always a little careful over time to say it's now bigger, because I think in the 70s, we had really difficult environment. There was a government that intervened. There were capital controls. There was a Cold War, etc. So I think every generation has its own challenges, and I think the challenges we have now are real, and we have to adjust to them. But I don't think, in sum, that these challenges are much bigger. I mean, think about the people that were in 1930 or 1940 in Europe. What kind of challenges they had, the young generation.
That's a very good point, Christian. Thank you for putting it in historical context. Our whole series is about leaders speaking about leadership. So I wanted to ask you, do you want to leave our listeners with one final thought?
I think on leadership, it's sort of, there are talented leaders and there are untalented leaders. These are probably the top 10% and the bottom 10%. I would say 80% of all human beings can learn a lot in leadership. And my big point that I always make to young people is, you have to work on it. It's like, learning sport. You have to train, you have to do the heavy lifting in the gym, but you also have to go and play games, and you will, get a bloody nose sometimes, and you will do mistakes, and people will be, appalled what you did, and 2 weeks later you will shoot an important goal. And that's the same with leadership. It's just something you have to train. You're not born with it. You have to try to, get as much experience you can in many environments that you can train yourself. So that's my basic point on leadership.
That was a really stimulating conversation. Christian Casal, thank you so much for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much.